The church fell silent the moment my sister's lips touched his. I stood at the altar, bouquet forgotten in my grip, watching Sophia kiss Daniel. My Daniel, with the confidence of a woman who believed she had already won. 300 guests stared. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's face turned the color of old ash. Someone's champagne glass shattered against the marble floor. Sophia pulled back, her smile slow and deliberate, and I watched her eyes find mine across the sea of white chairs. She was waiting for me to cry. She was waiting for me to run. Every fiber of the room expected me to shatter right there in my wedding dress, the bride who had just watched her sister claim her future husband at the altar. I could feel the collective intake of breath, the phones already rising to capture the moment. But I did not cry. I did not run. I reached into the pocket sewn into my gown, the one my seamstress had questioned, and pulled out a single envelope. The name on the front made Daniel's face drain of color. I held it up so the front row could see, and I waited. The handwriting on the envelope belonged to Daniel. He knew it before I even spoke. I had kept it in a safety deposit box for 11 months, the ink faded but unmistakable. 3 words. For Cassandra. My name, not Sophia's. Daniel's hand dropped from my sister's waist like he'd been burned. The priest looked between us, uncertain whether to continue. The organist had stopped playing. In the silence, I could hear my mother whispering my sister's name like a warning. I opened the envelope slowly, deliberately, and pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. It was a letter Daniel had written me 6 months before he proposed. In it, he described the house we would buy, the life we would build, the children we would name. It ended with a promise. No matter what happens, you are my only future. I read it aloud. My voice did not waver. Sophia's confident smile began to crack at the edges. She turned to Daniel, expecting him to explain, to defend, to do anything other than stand there with his mouth slightly open and his eyes fixed on the letter I was holding. But he said nothing. He had nothing to say. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into the envelope. You want him? I asked Sophia, and my voice carried to the back of the church. You can have him. I set the envelope on the altar beside the unity candle and stepped back. My heels clicked against the marble, each step deliberate. I walked down the aisle while the guests parted for me like water. I did not look back. Behind me, I heard Sophia's voice rise, sharp and confused, demanding to know what I was doing. I heard Daniel's attempt at an explanation, something about misunderstanding, about the letter being old. I heard my father say, very quietly, don't. I kept walking. The church doors were heavy oak, and they closed behind me with a sound that felt like a door slamming on a prison I had almost entered. Outside, the limousine waited. The driver opened the door, and I slid into the back seat before he could ask where we were going. Airport, I said. He nodded and pulled away from the curb. Through the tinted windows, I watched the church recede. I did not cry then either. I had done all my crying 11 months ago, in the dark, alone, when I first understood what Daniel and Sophia had done. 11 months earlier, I had come home early from a business trip. I was a forensic accountant, and my firm had finished the audit ahead of schedule. I thought about surprising Daniel with dinner. Instead, I found him in my apartment with my sister. They were on the couch, not touching, but the space between them was the kind of space that only exists when 2 people have been touching and just stopped. Sophia's hair was loose. Daniel's collar was unbuttoned. They both looked at me with the same expression, the one that said they had been caught but were already calculating how to explain it away. I said nothing. I walked past them into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and drank it while they sat frozen in the living room. When I came back, Sophia was straightening her shirt. Daniel was saying my name in that pleading tone I had once found endearing. I looked at them, really looked, and I understood. This was not the first time. It would not be the last. The question was not whether they had betrayed me. The question was what I was going to do about it. What I did was nothing. At least, that was what they saw. I told Daniel I forgave him. I told Sophia I wanted her to be happy. I said the words they wanted to hear, and I watched them believe me. Daniel proposed 3 weeks later, and I said yes. I threw myself into wedding planning with enthusiasm that made my mother weep with relief. I included Sophia in every decision. The dress, the flowers, the venue. I made her my maid of honor. I made sure everyone saw how close we were, how I had risen above the petty jealousies that could destroy a family. While I planned my wedding, I was also planning something else. I opened a new bank account at a credit union Daniel did not know about. I hired a private investigator who specialized in financial forensics. I began documenting everything. The late nights Daniel claimed were work. The withdrawals from our joint account that aligned exactly with Sophia's credit card statements. The messages they thought they had deleted. I was patient. I was methodical. I was a forensic accountant after all. Finding the truth was what I did. The truth was worse than I had imagined. The affair had been going on for 2 years, longer than Daniel and I had been engaged. Sophia had been living in an apartment Daniel was paying for, a fact he had hidden by routing payments through a shell company. He had taken money from our joint savings to cover it, not just his contributions. Mine too. I sat in my office at midnight, staring at spreadsheets that mapped the entire web of deception. The investigator had given me photographs, bank statements, and text message transcripts. I read them all. I memorized them. Then I locked everything in a safe and went back to planning my wedding. My mother commented on how calm I seemed. She said I was handling the stress beautifully. I smiled and thanked her and chose the calligraphy for the invitations. Inside, I was building something. A strategy. A trap. I knew Daniel would not end the affair. Men like him did not end things. They simply waited until the risk of exposure outweighed the pleasure of the secret. I needed to control exactly when that moment arrived. The weapon I chose was the prenuptial agreement. Daniel was the one who wanted it. His family had money, old money, the kind that came with expectations. He presented the prenup to me as a formality, something his father required. I read it carefully, and I found what I was looking for. The document contained an infidelity clause. If either party was proven to have engaged in an affair during the marriage, the wrong party would receive full ownership of all jointly acquired assets plus a penalty payment structured to be significant enough to hurt. Daniel thought he was protecting his inheritance. He had no idea he was handing me the blueprint for his destruction. I signed the prenup with a smile and told him I understood completely. I told him I trusted him. I watched relief flood his face, and I felt nothing but cold certainty. The agreement would not be enforceable unless the affair continued after the marriage. I needed proof that it had. I needed to wait until the vows were exchanged and the ink was dry. The wedding was planned for July. As the date approached, I watched Daniel and Sophia grow careless. They were so convinced of my blindness that they had stopped hiding. At the rehearsal dinner, Sophia whispered something in Daniel's ear that made him laugh. A private laugh, an intimate one. My mother noticed. She gave me a look that asked if I was sure about this. I squeezed her hand and told her everything was fine. On the morning of the wedding, I arrived at the church 3 hours early. I found Daniel in the groom's suite, alone, adjusting his cufflinks. I kissed him on the cheek and told him I was excited to become his wife. He smiled at me, and for one moment, one terrible, human moment, I almost believed he meant it. Then I saw the text message on his phone screen. Sophia's name. A heart emoji. The message said, "See you at the altar." I excused myself to the bathroom and stood at the sink for 5 minutes, breathing. When I came out, I was calm again. I was ready. What happened at the altar was not a surprise. I had known Sophia would do something dramatic. She had always needed to be the center of attention, always resented the idea that I had found happiness before her. I had given her every opportunity to stop. I had left the door open for her to walk away with her dignity intact. She chose the public spectacle instead. When she kissed Daniel, when she looked at me with that victorious smile, she believed she was taking something from me. She did not understand that she was giving me exactly what I needed. The envelope I pulled from my dress contained the prenup, the investigator's report, and a single photograph of Daniel and Sophia leaving the apartment he had paid for. I had the originals locked in my office. What I held at the altar was a copy, but it was enough. I did not need to win in the church. I only needed to show them that the game had changed. I left the envelope on the altar and walked out. I flew to Chicago that night. I had rented an apartment 3 months earlier under a business name I had created for the purpose. Daniel did not know about it. Neither did Sophia. I stayed in Chicago for 10 days, and I did not answer my phone. My mother left 17 messages, ranging from frantic to furious. My father sent a single text, "Whatever you need." Sophia's calls started with demands and ended with threats. Daniel's calls never came. That told me everything I needed to know. On the 11th day, I returned home. The apartment was empty. Daniel had moved out, apparently, though he had taken only his clothes. The furniture we had picked out together was still there. The photographs of us were still on the walls. I stood in the doorway and looked at the life I had almost had, and I felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude that I had found out before it was too late. Gratitude that I had planned. Gratitude that I was not the woman I had been 11 months ago, crying alone in the dark. I filed for annulment based on fraud. The grounds were simple. Daniel had entered the marriage without intending to honor its terms. I had proof. The investigators' report documented the affair continuing after the wedding, the text messages, the credit card receipts, the apartment lease with Daniel's signature dated 3 days after the ceremony. The prenup's infidelity clause became the cornerstone of the legal filing. Daniel's lawyer called mine within hours. They wanted to settle. I told my lawyer to say no. I wanted to go to court. I wanted the record to show exactly what had happened. The case never made it to trial. Daniel's family had too much to lose. His father made a call to my father, and my father made a call to me. He did not ask me to stop. He asked me, for the first time in my life, what I needed. I told him. The settlement was signed 3 weeks later. I walked away with the apartment, the car, and a sum of money that Daniel's father agreed to pay to avoid public disclosure of the investigators' full findings. I did not need the money. I wanted him to feel the weight of writing the check. Sophia did not take the loss quietly. She showed up at my apartment on a Tuesday afternoon, her face blotched with crying, her voice rising with each accusation. She called me a liar. She called me cruel. She said I had trapped Daniel, that I had manipulated the situation, that I had never loved him at all. I let her finish. When she was done, I opened the door wider and pointed to the camera in the corner of my living room. I told her that everything she had just said was recorded. I told her I had 17 months of documentation, including text messages where she had bragged about sleeping with my fiancé. I told her that if she ever came near me again, I would release every word of it to every person who had attended our wedding. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "You planned this," she whispered. I did not answer. She left. She has not spoken to me since. My mother cried about that for a while. My father told her, quietly, that sometimes the people we love make choices that remove themselves from our lives. My mother was the moral witness I had not known I needed. In the weeks after the wedding, she called me every day. She did not ask why I had not told her what I was planning. She did not defend Sophia. She listened. She asked questions. She said, slowly, "I always thought there was something off about how he looked at her." She said it like she was confessing a sin, and I understood then that I was not the only one who had seen the truth and looked away. My mother became my ally in ways I had not expected. She sat with me while I went through the apartment, separating Daniel's remaining things into boxes. She helped me repaint the bedroom a color he would have hated. She told me stories about my grandmother, a woman I had never met, who had left her husband in 1962 with nothing but a suitcase and a job offer 3 states away. She said leaving was the bravest thing she ever did. My mother told me. She said staying would have killed her slowly. I thought about that a lot in the months that followed. The collapse of Daniel's world was not instant. It was a slow erosion, the kind that happens when people begin to see what they had chosen to ignore. His family's friends learned the details of the annulment, not from me, but from the kind of gossip that spreads through country clubs like fire through dry grass. His father's business partners began to look at him differently. His mother stopped including him in family photographs. The promotion he had been expecting went to someone else. I heard all of this through the network of people who felt compelled to update me. I did not ask for the information. I did not turn it away either. I let myself feel a small, quiet satisfaction with each new piece of news. Not because I wanted him to suffer, because I wanted to know that actions had consequences. That was the lesson I had learned in 11 months of silence, that the world does not correct itself. People must correct it. I had corrected mine. Daniel married Sophia 3 months after the annulment. I learned about it from a Facebook post my cousin sent me, accompanied by a string of shocked emojis. They had eloped. No family, no friends, no photographer. Just a justice of the peace, and the kind of quiet wedding that spoke more about shame than love. I looked at the photograph. Sophia in a white dress that was not her style, Daniel in a suit that did not fit, and I felt nothing. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Nothing. I closed the browser and went back to work. That was the moment I knew I was healed. The opposite of love was not hatred. It was indifference. I had spent months building my case, waiting for the right moment to strike, imagining the look on their faces when everything fell apart. I had gotten what I wanted, and now I did not care. I cared about the life I was building, the apartment I was making mine, the friendships I was deepening, the career I was finally giving my full attention. That was the revenge I had not anticipated, a life too full to hold bitterness. The business started quietly. I had always been good with numbers, but I had never thought of it as anything other than a job. In the months after the annulment, I began to see it differently. I had spent a year tracking the movements of two people who believed they were invisible. I had documented lies, followed money, built a case that a legal team had accepted without question. Those were skills. Skills I could use. I started taking on private clients, people who suspected they were being betrayed, people who needed proof before they could act. My reputation grew. I was not the emotional one. I was the one who came in with spreadsheets and bank statements, who laid out the truth in black and white and let the client decide what to do with it. I was good at it. More than good. I was the person women called when they suspected what I had suspected, when they needed someone who understood. I did not charge them what I could have. I charged enough to be taken seriously, and no more. That mattered to me. The final legal defeat came 18 months after the wedding. Daniel had been sued by a former business partner, someone he had defrauded, someone who had found the evidence I had left behind. I had not planted it. I had simply declined to destroy it when Daniel's lawyer asked. The evidence was my work product, part of the annulment file. I was under no obligation to protect a man who had stolen from me. The lawsuit went to trial. Daniel lost. The judgment was public, and it was devastating. His father did not help him this time. There was no money left to protect. I read about the verdict in the business section of the newspaper, the way anyone might read about a stranger. Sophia had left him the week before the trial started. She moved back in with our mother, which I learned from my father, who told me with the careful neutrality of a man who had learned not to take sides. I did not ask for details. I did not need them. The story was over. I saw Daniel once more, a year after the trial. I was leaving a client meeting in the city, and he was standing outside the building, hands in his pockets, looking smaller than I remembered. He asked if we could talk. I told him I had 5 minutes. He said he was sorry. He said it the way people say it when they have been rehearsing the words for months. He said he had ruined everything, that he thought about it every day, that he wished he could go back and make different choices. I listened. When he finished, I told him I accepted his apology. Then I told him that acceptance did not mean I wanted him in my life. I told him I had built something new, something good, and that there was no room in it for him. He nodded like he had expected that answer. He asked if I was happy. I said yes. He walked away. I watched him go, and I realized I had not thought about him in weeks. That was the gift I had given myself. The gift of forgetting. Sophia came back differently. She showed up at my office 6 months after the divorce, looking older, quieter. She sat in the chair across from my desk and folded her hands in her lap. She did not apologize. She did not explain. She asked if I would see her for coffee sometime. I looked at her, my sister, who had been my best friend, who had chosen a man over me, who had made a public spectacle of my wedding, and I saw someone I did not know. I told her I would think about it. She left. I thought about it for 3 weeks. I thought about the childhood we had shared, the secrets we had kept, the ways she had always competed with me. I thought about the ways I had led her. I thought about whether forgiveness was possible, whether it was desirable, whether it was something I owed her or something I owed myself. In the end, I called her. We met for coffee. We sat in a cafe where no one knew us, and we talked about our mother's health and our father's retirement and everything except the things that had broken between us. It was not reconciliation. It was a beginning. My mother was diagnosed with breast cancer in the spring of the second year. The news came in a phone call from my father, his voice tight with the effort of staying calm. I drove to their house that night and found my mother in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, like nothing had changed. She looked up when I came in and said, "I'm going to be fine."
She was.
The treatment was aggressive, but effective. The months that followed were hard, appointments and medications, and the slow, exhausting work of recovery. Sophia and I took turns staying with our parents. We did not discuss the past. We focused on the present, on the small acts of care that mattered more than any conversation. There was a night late when my mother was sleeping and Sophia and I sat on the back porch in silence. She reached over and took my hand. I let her. We sat like that until the sun came up. I do not know what she was thinking. I was thinking that some wounds healed slowly and some never healed at all, but the space between them could still hold something new. The new home came in the third year. I bought a house on a quiet street, the kind of house I had imagined with Daniel, but had never let myself want. It had a garden in the back, a kitchen with old cabinets, a porch that caught the afternoon light. I painted the walls myself, colors I chose without anyone's input. I hung photographs of my parents, of my friends, of places I had traveled. There were no photographs of Daniel. There were no photographs of Sophia. I did not need reminders of what I had survived. I needed reminders of what I was building. The house became a kind of monument, not to revenge but to reinvention. Every room held a choice I had made alone. Every corner reflected a life I had designed without compromise. I hosted dinners for my friends, my colleagues, the women I had helped. My mother came when she was strong enough. My father came every Sunday to watch football on the couch he had helped me pick out. It was not the life I had planned. It was better. The career growth surprised me. I had started the business as a way to use my skills to help women who were where I had been. It became something larger. A law firm reached out, asked if I would consult on cases involving financial fraud in divorce proceedings. A television producer called, wanting to know if I would appear as an expert. I said yes to the first, no to the second. I did not want to be a story. I wanted to do the work. The work mattered. Every case was a woman who had been told she was crazy, who had been made to feel small, who had been convinced that the evidence she suspected was not real. I showed them the evidence. I gave them the power to choose. Some stayed. Some left. Some fought. Some walked away. I did not judge their choices. I only gave them the truth and let them decide what to do with it. That was the power I had wished for when I was standing at the altar with an envelope in my dress. The power to see clearly and act. The confidence came slowly. I had always been competent, always been capable, but I had not understood my own strength. I had spent years making myself smaller, easier, more palatable. I had told myself that love required accommodation, that partnership meant compromise, that the things I gave up were the price of being chosen. I had been wrong. The woman who walked out of that church was not the woman I had been. She was someone I was becoming. Someone who trusted her instincts. Someone who did not need to be chosen because she had chosen herself. I looked in the mirror one morning, 3 years after the wedding, 2 years after the annulment, 1 year after the house, and I saw a face I recognized. It was my face. Not the face I had worn for Daniel, not the face I had worn for my family, not the face I had worn to make everyone comfortable. It was my face, and it was enough. I smiled at myself in the mirror, and I meant it. The relationship with Sophia settled into something I did not have a name for. We saw each other at holidays, at my mother's follow-up appointments, at the occasional dinner my father arranged with careful optimism. We were polite. We were careful. We did not talk about the past because there was no language for what had happened, no script for the conversation that would make it right. I did not need her to apologize. I did not need her to explain. I needed to let go of the weight of her choices, and I had done that. She was my sister. She was not my keeper, not my judge, not the measure of my worth. She was a woman who had made a terrible decision, and I was a woman who had survived it. We were both older now. We were both quieter. We sat at my mother's kitchen table, passing plates, making small talk, and it was not the closeness we had once shared. But it was something real. Something built on the ground that remained after the fire. I think about that day at the altar sometimes. I think about the woman who walked down the aisle with an envelope hidden in her dress, who let her sister kiss her fiancé because she needed the proof. I think about how scared she was, how angry, how determined. I think about the years she spent planning, the evidence she gathered, the silence she maintained. I do not regret any of it. But the revenge was never the point. The point was the woman I became in the aftermath. The point was the business I built, the women I helped, the house I painted myself, the confidence I earned. The point was learning that I did not need to be chosen by someone else to be valuable. I chose myself. I walked away from a marriage that would have destroyed me, and I walked toward a life I built with my own hands. In choosing to protect my future, I finally learned who I was without him. That was the victory, not the fall. The rising.